that way, but also we find in the book of John the Lord Jesus Christ 7 times saying, I am, which shows the power, which also shows the fact that Christ is able to meet our greatest needs. Now, the first time we used it, we talked about being the bread of life, where Christ said, I am the bread of life. That was in John chapter 6, verse 35. Now, bread, food, whatever, things we nourishment, it actually brings contentment to our lives. And that's the first thing we talked about is Christ. Since he is the bread of life, I am the bread of life, he brings contentment in the life of a Christian. We also talked secondly when Christ said in John chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world, showing the fact is that he is the true light of the world. He's the one that gives us direction in our lives as Christians. And of course, daily in our lives, we need direction. Daily in our lives, we need direction. He went on in John chapter 10, verse 7, saying, I am the door. Now, being a door, of course, the fact is, in a house, he's talking about there's only one way you can get in the house, and that's through the door. There's no other way. You can't go through a window, you'd be a thief and a robber. But Christ is a door for us to have eternal life. So actually being the fact is that I'm the door also means there's protection there because he's the only door. There's no way that we can lose our salvation because he's the door to our salvation. He says, I'm the good shepherd. Actually also, I am the good shepherd in John chapter 10, verse 11. Again, protection, him being the shepherd. Psalms chapter 23 talks about being a shepherd. David wrote that because the fact is David was a shepherd, and it's talked about how Christ is a shepherd. And that's one of the lessons we missed because the fact is the building was being worked on. But actually being a shepherd, if you think about those sheep, a lot of times that shepherd would take those sheep and put them back in a fold. He would actually go back in like a half cave, put the sheep back there, and he would guard the front of that cave. Or a lot of times if nothing like that was available, he would build sticks and shrubs and branches around him and put thorns on top of there, and only one entrance would be that way the shepherd would protect those sheep. And we think about that, a lot of those illustrations Christ gave because the fact is he's the one that protects us daily in our lives as Christians. And of course, our greatest need we have also, one of the greatest needs we have also is, of course, protection. On Easter, Christ said, I'm the resurrection and life, John chapter 11, verse 20, which as Christians gives us hope. Gives us hope. We don't have to hope we have salvation, but gives us hope. The fact is, what's ahead of us for in the future? Okay? The resurrection. I'm the resurrection of life. That's Christ making that statement. He also talked about that I am the way, the truth, and the life in John chapter 14. The fact is, he's the only way, the only truth, and the only life. There's a lot of people who claim as far as being religious leaders per se, which they are, but there's only one way, there's only one truth, and of course that's being Christ. So all these different ways we learn about the fact is that Christ is the only way. He says, I am the truth, which is the truth and life, which is John chapter 14. Again, the only truth that we get in the world is through Christ. Today, which shows actually that we have peace within us. Today we're going to be on page 70. So if you would turn over to page 70 in your books. And what Christ is saying here on page 70 is, I am the vine. Now, the vine is important. And I like the way that Christ gives these illustrations because throughout the book of John and different parts in the Bible, he gives like illustrations of agriculture. Now, can anybody tell me any place else that Christ uses agriculture for illustrations or for parables or anything along those lines? Remember any place else, Marty? Sowing the seed, exactly. We're going to talk about that a little bit today too. Any others? Reaping, sowing. Look out in the fields, and the fields were what? White unto harvest. How many laborers were there? Few. So, again, throughout this whole illustrations that Christ gives, he uses agriculture as a method of teaching. And what Christ did is what we do today, try to bring the principles down, or teaching down, to where people can understand it. Christ never went over top of people's head. He always taught right where they were at. They understood agriculture. They grew fig trees, they grew grapevines. I grow tomatoes in the summertime. So when it talks about Christ being the vine, I understand exactly what that means because the fact is, he's the vine where the branches get their nourishment from. Okay? We'll give an illustration of that pretty soon. But on page 70, there shows something kind of, which we are a lot of times. It shows a hamster there. That hamster sitting there spinning around. Your kids ever raise hamsters? Or My son did. And they used to get out and get lost, and I won't go with the stories with those because sometimes we'd find them like a month later. Some were dead, and I won't go into that. But anyway, hamsters usually have to exercise, so you put a wheel in there, and they sit there and spin that wheel. I think to myself, that's stupid. They're sitting there running because the fact is they're going nowhere. But then the fact is in our lives today, a lot of times we get so busy that we're just spinning our wheels. There's no purpose to life. Life sort of like seems endless in a way, and a lot of times we do things. Doing training, I used to do training for a living. And doing training, a lot of times I would have a purpose as far as why I'm preparing a subject and have a goal in mind of why I'm doing it. And the whole idea was not to be up there teaching them for 3 or 4 days just to be talking because that wears you out. The whole idea was to try to help them be better at the job they were doing. But then when you see people back there kind of like, I said, boy, I'm boring. But what it usually meant is they weren't really interested in all of what you're saying. They had no purpose in what they were doing. Actually, it was just they were there for a job which got paid on Fridays, and that was all the only reason they were there. There's no purpose involved. A lot of times as young parents, when you're raising children, you get so busy. You remember those days. You're taking this kid here, you're taking that kid there. My daughter was cheerleading, my son was playing soccer. Practice for this, practice for that. This activity is at school, that activity for school. Going to games, going to this game, making sure that I'm spending equal time with both of them. And after a while, that same thing turns out to where it seems like you're spinning your wheels, but yet as a young parent, as you get older, you realize that there was a purpose behind that. Because the purpose behind that was you was educating them and helping them to grow. And then when you see them the way they're with their children and how they're not spinning their wheels, but they're trying to train their children, then you find out that there is a true purpose in what you do as an adult. But sometimes, again, we can get so involved, and not especially as Christians, but those who are not Christians, you get so involved to where they're so busy, they really have no purpose in life. Just spinning wheels, spinning wheels, spinning wheels. People say, I'm so busy. And you ask them what they're busy doing, and a lot of them don't know. They're just shook up. They're a mess. Because the fact is, they always think they have to be doing something. But the fact is, as Christians, we have to realize that there has to be a purpose in life. And that point there on page 71 tells it very clearly. Jesus is the vine who empowers us to live productive lives. The purposes we have in life, actually, we're going to talk about the fruits in what we have in life. There's purpose in the life of a Christian. There's very much purpose in the life of a Christian. We're going to find that out today, okay? Talk about that a little bit, okay? Let's turn over to page 72, I'm sorry. Start getting the scriptures of John chapter 15. Somebody get a volunteer for read the 1 through 3? Okay, Emery.
I am the vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away, and every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth much fruit. More fruit.
Okay.
Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken.
Very good. Again, the analogy here Christ is giving is something that he's talking to his disciples here, is something that they could understand, something they could relate to. Because, yeah, some of them were fishermen, but still in all, they knew about planting. They knew about producing. They knew obviously about fig trees. They knew about grapes. They knew about the different things that grew in life. And the fact is, what Christ is doing is he's using an analogy here, talking about a vine, a branch. And the very first part here, when Christ starts talking about him in chapter 15, verse 1, he starts out and he says, I am the true vine. Now, when he says, I am the true vine, what does that kind of make you think of when he says, I'm the true vine?
There's false vines.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good. There's many vines out there. There's vines out there, actually, which are false religions. There's Mormons. There's Hindus. You name it. They've got them out there. But you go to their graves, and what happened? The graves still have the bones there. But the true vine is the one who truly nourishes his sheep, which we are. He truly nourishes his branches. And we got to realize in life, him being the true vine is where we get our nourishment from as Christians. Okay? We don't get it from us. Okay? It all comes from Christ. We have to realize where it comes from. The first point I want to bring out here in these first 3 verses is God prunes our lives to make us productive for him. He prunes our lives to make us productive for him. And that's what he's talking about here in verses 1 through 3. He says, I'm the true vine, and my Father is a husbandman. Now, what's a husbandman? I'm a husbandman, in a way. Takes care of the garden, takes care of the vineyard. He's the one that kind of, plows? Caretaker, exactly. He fertilizes. I got to do that sometime. Sometimes at one time there's sowing, there's watering, there's reaping, everything. Sometimes it happens all at one time. Okay? Sometimes it does. Of what happened when that seed was planted. So sometimes in life, again, with agriculture being used here, it's talking about fruit, the fruit of mankind as far as the fruit of being saved. All of us actually are the fruit of someone's labor. That's why God left us here on this earth, is in order to bear fruit, Some little fruit, some much fruit, but all of us have a task to do in some way, whether it's planting or whether it's watering or through our own life in order for a person to come to Christ. That's the way Christ did it. He didn't ride across the sky for all of sin and come short of the glory of God. He does it through mankind, through planting, watering, and then reaping. So,
That's the finished work of the vine.
exactly.
The finished work of the vine.
Yeah.
So God works through Christ. Christ works through the branches, and the branches bear fruit. And who eats the fruit?
Who eats the fruit? The world eats the fruit. Eats us up.
If the world can't eat the fruit of a Christian, then you're no good to God.
So the second one, though, kind of talks along those lines in a way, too, because it says, let's turn to Matthew chapter 7. This gives an illustration, which I know if you've heard of this before, but it kind of like ties in with a fruit, because it talks about a fruit. Matthew chapter 7, let's start at verse 15. He says, beware of the false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You shall know them by what? By their fruits. You'll know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? The grapes don't come from thorns. No way possible. And the fact is also that figs don't come from thistles. He says, even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast in the fire, whereby by their fruits ye shall know them. There's another fruit which the Bible talks about as well, as far as being fruiting, as far as the harvesting of souls. It's talking about actually the works we do as Christians. Now, those works also come hand in hand. The fact is, people seeing what we're doing is a lot of times this leads them to Christ. That's what I did before I got saved. A lot of times I'd see a Christian say he's a Christian at work, and I would watch him. You know, what kind of works does he do? Well, if a guy sits there and cusses and carries on like that, and I said, well, if he's a Christian, I'm a Christian too. I can do just as well as he does. But the fact is that by their fruits you shall know them. The Bible also, I was looking at this a little bit more in James chapter 3. James says, does a fountain send forth at the same time sweetener? Is it possible for the same mouth